This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours? Hello everyone, welcome back. We're going to be covering another series today. It's Samu here, and joining me as usual, it's Guardian Enzo. Now, we're going to do it similar to our first two episodes where we recommended a series that we love to each other that the other hadn't read yet. This time, I picked the series again. So this is Blue Flag. This is manga by KAITO, who I should say started in Weekly Shonen Jump back in 2012 with the serialization of Cross Manage, which was quite an unconventional sports series that I really enjoyed. It was cancelled in the end. It was like 5 volumes long. It was about a girls' lacrosse high school team and the boy who ends up being their manager. And yeah, it manages to avoid a lot of obvious tropes and romance plots and just sticks to whatever Kaito had in mind, which I think translates to Blue Flag as well, in terms of the type of stories that Kaito likes to do. Blue Flag, I should say, it published on Jump Plus, so they did move publication after two unfortunate failures in Weekly Shonen Jump. And this one was from 2017 to 2020, and it's also available in English by Viz, so it's readily available for everyone to read. And to give a bit of a synopsis, is this is a series actually where, to sum it up, and even to have our discussion non-spoiler in the beginning, is going to be quite difficult. I feel I'm trying to decide how much I should reveal, but let me go with roughly where the first volume is, and I think this is generally what is advertised, which is Blue Flag. It begins with this story about three high schoolers in their final year of high school, and they're on the precipice of entering adulthood. You've got Taichi, who's seems quite an ordinary boy. You've got his childhood friend, who he is getting close again with after kind of falling apart. Their relationship growing distant in middle school. That's Touma. He's more of a bit of a jock, and he's physically different and larger and bigger than Taichi, and he's quite popular with everyone. And then you've got the sweet little naive Futaba, who's this girl that has a crush on Toma. And the story begins when Futaba tells Taichi in class that she does have this crush on him and she wants to get to know him better, using his childhood friend as a way to get in, even though there's all these other girls who are continually also trying to get with Toma. And yeah, the story starts from there, where it's about Taichi agreeing to help Futaba get to know Toma better and potentially start a relationship, and him also getting to know Toma again better after all those years as well. And from there, characters develop feelings. You have what begins as a love triangle turns into a love square, if you can even call it that, and then it kind of escalates and goes on further from there. Yeah, the reason why I've recommended it and the reason why I really like it is it's a series that ever since I did read it a couple years ago, that I know that it conjures up a lot of discussion and people have differing takes on how it progresses and as well as how it ends. And it's the sort of series that I really wanted to have a good in-depth conversation about. And since Enzo hadn't read it, I thought this would be the perfect chance. Other things I should say is does it's a coming of age high school story, and I think it is one of my favorites of that subgenre. But I think Blue Flag is committed to specific themes that it explores, which I found just really resonated with me. Quite a lot of sensitive issues that it goes into without ever getting into that territory of like perpetual gloom, even though it so very easily could. It manages to do this mixture of a nice balance of tones and perspectives of all these characters, which, yeah, I can't wait to get into. Um, and then finally, before I get from your point of view, Enzo, I would say as well, of the many reasons that I do love the series, one of them is that looking back on it and rereading parts of it for this discussion, I genuinely do get a sense that every character that Kaito has created here is fully fleshed out and has a point of view and feels like they have a history and a reason for believing all the things that they believe. So that whenever these big plot moments happen, and several of them do throughout the story, it almost just feels like the characters just need to be plopped in, and the it's already there. What comes from it feels natural, just for having those characters having that conflict with each other. And yeah, it's just one of the series where I'm always interested to see every character's perspective. But I know, Anzo, you didn't have. Oh, actually, you tell me, what was your experience of or knowledge of the series going in, and I suppose initial impressions?
I mean, what I knew about it was that it was well regarded among the circles of manga and anime fans who I tended to communicate with. And I knew that there were some themes to it that I guess were in the non spoiler part of the discussion. I feel like, as you say, it's almost impossible to talk about this series in a completely non spoilery way. Although I feel like the essence of it is it's so little a spoiler because it's not does nothing that comes up later in the series comes as a big surprise to me, and I didn't know too many details about it going in. But I guess my perspective then for this portion of the discussion is just to look at it strictly in the abstract, and that's I think what I like about it is that it deals with some very interesting and very challenging and very difficult adolescent adolescent traumas, adolescent challenges in a pretty non-histrionic and pretty restrained and realistic way. I have some thoughts about how maybe in the final act that gets away from that just a little bit, but for the most part, what I appreciated about it is that it does get into some pretty heavy areas, as you say, without getting doom and gloomy. First of all, and for most of its run, without really getting into over dramatics and that kind of thing. And there's also I appreciate it as you talked about with the side characters and everyone feeling like they have a point of view and being fully formed. I generally agree with that, and there is one particular side character who wound up being my favorite character in the series, actually. So who I would certainly never have picked out as my eventual favorite character, even halfway through, I would never have picked it. So I like, as we talked about in my intro, I like series that surprise me, and in that sense, it did surprise me. None of the plot turns or the ending surprised me, but the things that I liked the most about the series, some of that ended up surprising me, and any kind of major surprise like that, I always appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into the specifics of plot points later on. For the most part, it feels like this should be a pretty straightforward, like high school, bit of romance, bit of comedy, bit of drama series. And it's a shonen, it is a shonen series as well. But when I think the reason why I really love it is when I compare it to those other series, I just think about all the topics and the decisions the series makes, that Kaito makes with Blue Flag. It's just it's a totally different perspective and goes in totally different directions than I feel so many of those series even consider a possibility of what they could explore with the characters.
I think so.
Well, here we go then. Let's go. Let's get spoiler specific. Let's get into what happens. Um, so this is a series which ends up by the end of the first volume making it obvious that this is going to be quite a different love triangle than like what's typically expected. It does hint originally that um, Touma, you don't really actually you don't get a sense of what Toma's feelings are too heavily. It's quite subtle in the paneling. It's not until the end of the first volume that you find out that Toma does, in fact, like Tai Chi. So then you've got this initial setup of Futaba is using Taichi to get to Toma. Taichi is at this time developing feelings for Futaba, and then Toma, as we find out, has feelings for Taichi. We also have the fourth character that gets introduced in this, which she does. I do feel quite sad for Masumi. I feel like she is almost like the fourth wheel, if
Yeah,
like in
yeah,
this
I agree with
relation,
that.
in this like series, in this dynamic. I think she is important, but I think she's almost more a reflection of the other what the other characters are doing, specifically Toma. So we found out that Masumi, who is Futaba's friend, she similar to Toma has feelings for her best friend, and they are both in the closet and don't want to tell them, basically, and they begin that relationship with themselves of confining each other.
Mm.
What should be said as well is very quickly you have this shift in Futaba's feelings towards Toma being actually going to Taichi. And I remember reading at the time, I was like, personally, like from my perspective, I really resonate with Toma as a character. I also really like Taichi as well. So seeing Taichi and Futaba have that relationship, which is just feels really sweet and endearing, and it feels correct. It feels like they work together as a couple, and at that point in the series, it feels really meant to be, even though it comes at the expense of these other characters. And no matter what scenario plays out, there's always going to be multiple characters who are unhappy or are left with some sort of feeling of not being complete in this messy love triangle square situation.
Which is very realistic.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you live in Japan. You have, I think, more on the ground. Well, I feel like than me, you have more of a perspective on how these sorts of stories and experiences resonate in the homeland where this comes from. Um, so yeah, what do you think?
I think, you know, Japan being basically a political political autocracy where you've had one party be in power. This is not a political show we're doing, but it's important in the context of a manga like this to talk about the fact that basically one party that sort of they wear they wear the aura of conservatism with a capital C as their mantra, you know, the liberal democrats and the misnamed liberal democrats. And so there's sort of been kind of the natural tendency in Japan is when something is uncomfortable or untraditional, you suppress discussion of it. And I think that's kind of been how it's been with the issues that Aono Flag talks about. And now those issues are finally bubbling to the surface because the rest of the world, as it so often has over the decades and centuries, most of it has moved on and left Japan behind. And there's a sense of there's a group of people in Japan who believe that that's first of all that is wrong. If you take the subject of, for example, marriage equality, a considerable majority of Japanese people believe marriage equality should exist in this country. They support it. Um, but you know, the ruling party, they can pretty much set the discourse, what's allowed and what's not allowed to be discussed in the political arena. And then, as I said, the general Japanese trend is suppressed discussion, and that's kind of how it's been. So that in that sense, the series is quite refreshing. Uh, I would say for me, it almost felt to me when I had finished it as if the author, the mangaka, had written the ending first, if that makes any sense. And I don't mean this as a criticism. I feel like there was a point to be made, and I think the point is what the rest of the series sprung from. Sometimes you feel like you have a story that's not entirely clear in the author's mind where it's going to go, and the ending sort of comes about as a byproduct of perhaps unplanned directions. In this case, I felt like either the entire story was written in their head or the ending was the first thing that went down on their yellow legal pad, and the rest of it was, okay, how are we going to get there? So I feel like this series was pointed in more than one sense. I think there was a direction it was going to go, and I think it goes there in a very believable and very compelling way. And I think when we talk about something being ahead of its time, I think Japan is now getting to the point where the things this series talks about are being talked about because you can only suppress them for so long.
That's interesting. I actually agree with you that the ending feels like it was pre-planned, and it was a case of that coming before the story that builds up to it. But I also feel like there is a consensus among some readers that the ending is tacked on and almost is contradictory to what happens or what comes before it. Before we get to any more specific points, I wanted to say, did you have any other feelings on the like love triangle and like how Taichi and Toma, well, maybe Toma specifically, how that was being handled or how he was dealing with this scenario? Was it ever a case of like you get with these like romance series where you're like, oh, you're like groaning at the character, being like, you should have done this, like you're being stupid, why aren't you doing that? This obviously does have a whole other layer of like masking an identity and balancing losing friendships over confessing. But I was just yeah.
I was never shouting that at the page, no, because you have to have a little empathy, you know. Put yourself in that position. Jesus, what the hell are you supposed to do? I mean, that's a really, really, that's an impossible situation. And I think in the end, it probably was handled badly by Toma, but I think you would be hard pressed to find anyone who handled it any better, just because he was trying for all those years, really, he was trying to spare Taichi of having to bear the burden of what he felt was a fruitless emotion. And it was partly because he didn't want to jeopardize their friendship, and that gets into this whole choice thing, which becomes a big factor in the ending, and partly because he knew that this would be a big burden for Taichi to have to bear, and he was trying to spare Taichi from having to bear it. If anything, I think Toma. If anything, I think Toma was too protective of Taichi over the years, and to the point where Taichi probably saw that as condescending. And I think that extended to his big secret, but it wasn't only his big secret. And I think that was a general kind of a spanner in the works of their relationship, is that Toma was a little bit condescending toward Taichi, I think. And I think Taichi resented that. The other interesting question to me is whether Taichi should have picked up on this sooner. It was certainly obvious to me, but I had a sense of distance from it that a character in the story wouldn't have. So I was trying to think to myself, if I were in Taichi's shoes, would I have been able to go all those years and not pick up on it? And I think the answer I came to is, yeah, I think it's possible. I think it's definitely possible, especially when you're that young. It's you don't have a lot of experiential context to help you figure that shit out. Especially since Taichi had probably never known anyone in his life who identified the way Toma did. So what would he draw on to help him? What would he draw on to help him see the truth before it was revealed to him explicitly? And then what did he have to draw on to help him process the emotions of dealing with it once he found out? And the answer is, I think, not much. He had to wing it.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think this is definitely a series where, as you're reading it, any thoughts or feelings about what you may have of what the characters are doing or how they're handling the situation is not a case of this is strange or annoying to me because I feel like the author is forcing this upon the characters and they're just it feels like they're being moved for like when it breaks the immersion and you know that this is just like a narrative with characters doing things. This is Blue Flag for me feels more like a case where it is rooted in that believability and that like inherent messiness of dealing with these sorts of like confessions and like understanding your sexuality and all these questions that come up with all these characters. And like I said earlier, the when you have Taichi and Futaba together, it feels very correct for both of those characters at that time. And it's a very sweet relationship. And you could critique Toma for inserting himself at that point of their life in which quote unquote potentially ruin that relationship that they've built up. If he did something sooner, or Tai Chi picked up on it sooner, then yeah, these things could have been avoided. But I think part of the reason why I like all that, and also why I really, in fact, love the ending, is I think a lot of the series comes down to these characters being it is to me it is specifically a series about these characters being in their final year of high school on the precipice of adulthood and things that all happen in that specific year of their life and whether that like reflects on who they are as people and what comes from that. Speaking of side characters and ones that stand out, I think we definitely agree on who this specific character is. This is Mami Yagihara. She is one. Yeah, I'm curious for your thoughts, but as I was reading, and I think is going to be the experience for I'm going to say 100% of people reading. She was a bit annoying at first, Mami. Whenever she came up, it was sort of like, oh, why is she inserting herself into like this dynamic with Toma? We've already like as the reader, we've established this sort of triangle square love situation, and then she comes in and it's you can there's almost this like sense of like desperation in her wanting to insert herself into his life. She comes off maybe quite brash and yeah, a little bit annoying. But then as the series, I'd say it's about midway through the series where you start to get her perspective, and all of a sudden she's the best character in the series. And this is maybe a hyperbole. I've read the series for a few years now, so it's not like it's super fresh in my mind. I still have this feeling from when I did read it. I I genuinely think she's up there as one as at least in shonen as one of the most authentically best written high school girl characters like in manga. I think the point of view that she has of you see that she changes personas throughout middle school and high school, balancing whether she wants to fit in or stand out. She wants to avoid being the object of affection for all these boys throughout her life that she just can't escape, while also wanting to be friends with them. At the same time, you have the relationship she has with girls who then would have disdain for her because they project their ideas of what they think, what sort of girl they think she is, and what we as the reader initially also believe she is. So she's doing these things that to other characters and to us initially seems to like be almost like, quite like performative and um, inserting herself in ways that just maybe aren't appropriate. But once you get her perspective and you understand that she just wants to like people and be friends with people, and she doesn't want all this mess, and she's trying her best to navigate those sorts of relationships with people. And you know I would argue that she's not succeeding. She's not doing it as well as she could. But I think that just makes her so. Once we see the other page flips and we see what she's thinking, it's like, aha, this makes perfect sense. And the fact that we went along with it is just, I think, from a writing perspective, I think Kaito did amazing with her character specific.
Yeah, I totally agree. She was my favorite character in the series, and she came out of nowhere in a way, really, because yeah, at about the halfway point of the series, I kind of knew who she was. She was that annoying girl who kept, as you said, inserting herself into situations in what seemed like an inappropriate way. But she actually, Toradora is not a series that I'm like a huge fan of, which I know some people are. But she brought in mind a character named Ami from Toradora, who was a character who really kind of annoyed me at the beginning and ended up being my favorite character in the series. And I think, in a sense, Mami is liberated by not being part of the triangle or the quadrangle, if you want to look at it that way. She's independent of it. So, as a character, she can strictly flower as an individual who isn't beholden of trying to support this ending that the author is trying to get to. She can, and she ends up being like sort of the ultimate bullshit meter in a way. She really calls it like she sees it. And I agree with you. She's struggling. She's not exactly doing everything right, but she is. I found that she was very identifiable for me, both because I've known a lot of people like her and I've shared a lot of the same frustrations that she has in some ways. And this question that she brings up about the reality of whether it is possible to just be friends or not, and if not, why not? I think sometimes you have to accept that things are the way they are and you can't change them. And I think that's where, as a 17-year-old girl, she hasn't quite learned that lesson yet. And it's causing her a lot of pain. But I really appreciated where she was coming from in terms of what she wanted and in terms of what she thought was right. And I think that little burst of chapters where she sort of took center stage out of nowhere and kind of almost hijacked the series for a little bit, those were really, in a lot of ways, those were my favorite chapters, because I really enjoyed the way I enjoyed the direction she took the story, and I enjoyed the issues and questions that she was bringing to the surface, and I also enjoyed the way that she was asking them. I mean, she really is someone who has a very distinct sense of individuality, and yeah, I just think Mami is great. She was probably my favorite character in the series, and I think I really appreciated, even though I did feel like she came out of nowhere in a sense, I really appreciated what she added to the mix.
Yeah, I think that the chapter that really like when things changed was when they're at the diner and she's speaking with Futaba and Masumi, and um, yeah, she's like a lightning bolt that comes, as you say, in the middle of the series, and like suddenly you're like, oh my god, this is a series about her. What's happening here? Um, Other things I really loved about her, I like that she does have that relationship with Shingo, who is one of Thomas' friends, and yeah, he's at least the proof that that relationship that they have from middle school can exist between boys and girls, and throughout the chapters, you get other characters who go to Shingo and like, oh, you've done this, or you've been with Mami, or you have feelings for her, don't you? And yeah, I really appreciate the series it didn't even consider that route. It kept that relationship um, sacred in what it was meant to represent, and yeah, I love that. The other aspect of it as well is, she has these like feelings about wanting to be friends with all these boys and to get rid of this like complication. But because the series and the characters are so inherently messy, and that's what makes it feel realistic, is she has these feelings for Toma, and it's almost contradictory to her belief slightly of, and I think that's where the inserting comes in, because here's the boy that she's found that she does like, that she is attracted to, and how she approaches him and how she puts herself forward to him. That's the part that then confuses other characters, but to her it makes complete sense. So yeah, how her and Toma's relationship um, develops is, it goes from my initial perspective of me being a bit annoyed by it, feeling like it was a distraction to what I wanted to see from the series, to then it becoming like a really wholesome and nice dynamic between the two of them, where you have that scene where Mami puts on the makeup for Toma and they're just sitting in that room together, and after attempting to like make her feelings obvious as she had throughout the series, she just is upfront with him and says that she likes him, and she then becomes the first person that Toma voices his true feelings for, and like he clearly explains that he has feelings for Taichi. What comes directly after that is another one of the side characters and Thomas' friends, Kensuke. He overhears this conversation, and there are hints throughout the series where Toma, Kensuke, and Shingo are like having these conversations of like what if, and like quote unquote boy talk, and you can always sense Toma's slight apprehension with the conversations, which I think for me resonates very strongly, and him like performing the almost this character that he's performing, this persona that he puts on, though he never, another reason why I really love Toma's character, he never lies. He just manages to sidestep these things in a way which I think uh, just feels truly like authentic to that experience of not wanting to out yourself and that feeling of being in the closet when the people that you see around you are perhaps not those you might feel comfortable with, knowing that. And then that escalates completely when Kinsuke is the one who has this pretty violent reaction to hearing that Toma is gay, and they start getting physical. And and one thing that I actually really appreciate is that you see that they're fighting over this, and Shingo just doesn't, him rejecting to help the friend who's being homophobic and pretty violent, I think speaks volumes for his character. It's not until all these other characters who weren't there on the scene find out later, and we have this scene similar to this like one chapter long heavy dialogue moment that we had with Mami when she was with the other girls in the diner. We have this scene where a lot of the other characters come together to speak about the aftermath of that fight that they had. They bring Taichi in with Shingo and Kensuke and other girls from the school as well. Yeah, it's a messy conversation, like a lot of these like conversations that happen in the series. Yeah. What was your take on that?
Honestly, that's one of the areas where I felt like things got a little forced for me. That that scene was it was pretty theatrical in a way a lot of the series was not. And as you say, these two girls were kind of even more out of nowhere than Mami, really. But they came in with some interesting perspectives, and Shingo's rebuttal to what they were saying was, I think, pretty valid. So it was interesting in a substantive way. It didn't really feel organic to the story to me, though. It really it was very theatrical, and it was not as natural as a lot of the other confrontational scenes in the series, and it kind of took me out of the moment a little bit. It felt like almost like in the middle of this story that I was reading, I was watching a play, if that makes any sense. And it I wouldn't say that I didn't. It's a scene that makes you think. I'll give it credit for that, because the argument that it's really Shingo who kind of ends up taking the command seat in the story at this point, because he's the one who really he sort of puts himself in between Kensuke and the girls, and Toma at this point is almost like a passenger, really. And so even Shingo up to that point had not been what I would call a major character. So it was like interesting having these people having this very theatrical argument, but it I felt like it did take me out of the moment. It didn't feel like I was as as much in the story as I had been before and as I would be after.
Well, I was going to ask then. So from that moment onwards, this is basically the final stretch of the series. We're here now. We're going to get to the ending. What was your feeling from that point onwards? Then did the series like recover, if it even was that dramatic a difference, or yeah? How do you think it wrapped up then in the
I
end?
mean, I don't think it necessarily had to recover, because I mean that was basically one chapter. I think tonally I was less like I said, it became less natural to me all towards the latter. There was too many long speeches. There was, it felt like things were more happening sort of through the characters' behavior and actions and conversation, and then it became a lot of them talking at each other. And I don't feel like that that was sort of a big part of the whole ending sequence, the last 6 or 8 chapters, probably. But as far as the ending itself, if we're in fair ground to talk about that, I felt like you said, like Futaba and Taichi were they were a sweet couple. They were a sweet couple. I did think they were good together, but I never really felt that they were necessarily romantic. I never really, you never saw them being physically intimate with each other in any way, really, or expressing. Remember, the whole thing started with Futaba being physically attracted to Touma, and that's the only reason Taichi really got involved in the situation in the first place. And at some point, there's no question that she transferred her affection to Taichi, and I think maybe she realized that Toma was not a candidate for her anyway. I think she might have picked up on that without really even realizing she did. And I felt like she and Taichi became almost like a confidant soulmate sort of relationship. But I struggle thinking back on it to remember any instances of them really demonstrating any physical attraction to each other or any kind of physical intimacy. They had some emotional intimacy, which obviously in the end is more important. But if you're going to talk about a romantic relationship, they're both integral components of it. So I was not surprised in that sense to see that ending. The extent to which uh, the series, well, I mean, we can talk about it. There was quite a time skip at the end, a significant one, and that took me a little bit by surprise. But as far as where it eventually landed, I kind of felt like that's where it was going all along. So I was not surprised by where it landed up. And I think the ending itself was quite quite powerful and quite successful. I just think some of the build up to it was a little disjointed, I would say.
Okay, that's okay. I was almost going into this, wondering if you were going to have the opinion which I almost feel like majority of readers have, which is, let's get to it. At the end, even though there was all these complications and drama that came out of the fallout from him being from Toma being outed and the feelings they had for Taichi, they managed to come together really nicely in the end. And then you end the penultimate chapter with this like capping off of their time together, and then it just ends with, and then Taichi and Futaba broke up 2 years later. And I feel like that moment is the part where I think a lot of readers feel it's a betrayal for what the series has delivered until that point.
And I understand
I don't
that.
agree with that
I don't
whatsoever.
agree with it, but I understand the
Yeah,
feeling.
yeah.
We spent all this time building up this relationship, and then oh, by the way, they broke up. I understand why people would get irritated with that. I just kind of felt like that's where it was headed anyway, so it didn't really bother me.
Yeah, I think this like breaks the unspoken conventional rules of a romance anime or manga, where the relationship that's being built up as the romance is just meant to end with them being together and happy. And I mentioned it briefly. I think what I love about Blue Flag and I think what I think is good to understand to not feel that reaction to the ending is I feel like Blue Flag is a story specifically about the final year of high school, and it's about three teenagers who just so happen to be in that class together and the choices that they made in their lives at that specific time, and it that it's like even in the text of the final two chapters where the choice that the characters make is and the reflection on the choices that they make, that is what the series is, that's what's trying to be put across here. And the fact that like you say, Taichi and Futaba, they had a cute relationship. It was very nice. It was their first serious relationship for both of them. But the reality of the case is, if you have a relationship in high school, it's probably not going to be the relationship you have for the rest of your life. I think it defines that specific time of your life. And I think that relationship they had defines that. And I think, as we see later on down the line, neither of them are resentful for the other for what didn't work out between them. I think the fact that the series went that route and was committed to not making it just um, not having Tolma continually be this third wheel between in this relationship, and go in a direction that maybe if you're concentrating so much on these two characters that it feels like a betrayal.
I don't know why you would feel that way because she was never one of the principal characters. She was the third character. So the ending did not have to revolve around her, you know? But I do understand why people are frustrated, but I think it is a little bit misguided. And I think, as you said, some of that comes from frustration of looking at it, expecting a more conventional manga ending and not getting one.
Yeah, and my argument when people say that you don't see enough of Taichi and Toma together for it to feel correct, I think you see the appropriate amount. And, you know, let's talk about the time skip. I think the time skip in the final chapter, yes, it is quite fast, it's quite abrupt, but I think it's also clearly like intended to be that way. It does this quite interesting first person perspective point of view where maybe you don't pick up for a few pages who you're actually following, like what's actually happening here. Uh, then it becomes clear that you're following Toma some years in the future, and you're seeing where all these characters are, and it is a big jump to like compare what literally just happened the chapter before with where they all are now. But I almost feel like having that stark contrast in childhood on the or adolescence on the brink of adulthood to then firmly being adults, having that gap being shortened just to show that contrast of how different life can be in that stage of life. Yeah, I think that's another thing that I really love about the ending. But I also get maybe people wanted like an extra chapter in there to like develop what would happen, but I almost feel like that would rob of like the punch, the ending that it has for all these characters.
I also think, to be honest, I think if they had ended it with the chapter with the three of them on the beach, I think that would have been a very good ending.
Yeah, it would totally work as capping off this sort of period of their life, and I'm sure it would still make those people as pissed off as they already are.
Oh, I'm sure it would, but I just think it would have worked. I think it. I think it actually it less satisfying in a way, but I think it actually would have satisfied some of the complaints of some of the complainers because I think it actually would have been, in a sense, a more believable ending in a way. And it's kind of a more traditional manga thing too to say, "Oh, leave it open ended," and that certainly would have checked that box.
Yeah, I think there is one other part of the ending which is contentious, which I do kind of understand. There are different readings you can have of the situation, and this is about Masumi, who is the fourth wheel in this and of the like primary cast. And yeah, she unfortunately she I feel like she gets the least exploration of those groups of characters, and for a character who is presented and like explains herself to be specifically attracted to women, but then you get to this point where she's with a man all these years in the future, and I feel like that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. It almost just comes down to you want how favorably you want to read that situation and the attentions of Kaito. It could be a case which is a common trope of high school girl, those sorts of feelings that they have, they will pass. They're not real. They will go into life, and that's just, they will move past them and end up with a man. That is quite.
I don't think he was going for that.
No, I don't think
No.
so either. But I think it's a common enough trope that I feel like that is where a lot of people maybe land on instinct. I think there is also a reality that she just the other reading is that she's bisexual, that she didn't know that she could have be with a
Yeah,
man, and she was so concentrated on this relationship
yeah.
that she didn't open herself up to that perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, she did date guys in high school. So I mean, the reality is, I think whether intentionally or not, I think what you have with the two couples at the end is like each one pissing off a different part of the audience, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So kind of covering all your bases as far as like not giving the fan service ending. Although some people will like both endings. I was not worked up enough about her as a character, honestly, to care that much either way, if I'm going to be brutally honest, because as you said, she's the least developed of the four main characters, and frankly, the least likable of the four main characters, in my opinion. So I wasn't that worked up about her. But again, I didn't come out of that saying, "Whoa, that was a huge." No, it was like, "Oh, all right, I could see that happening."
Yeah, I think if you're a reader who resonates specifically with Masumi's perspective for a majority of the series,
Yes,
then I get that you would feel that way. I think the
yeah,
reality is,
totally, totally, totally.
and I think the reality is, and again, if that is your perspective, then I can't really like talk you out of it. I think Masumi exists narratively as a mirror to Touma, and they go through this experience of both being in love with their best friend. And one scenario is what happens if you end up with your best friend, and the other is what happens if you didn't. And it just shows that it can happen either way. But yeah, before we go to final scores and like overview of our feelings, we have our recommendations that we like to give as well on similar series. My series is Our Dreams at Dusk, also known as Shimanami Tasogare by Yuuki Kamatani. It's a series specifically about a high schooler dealing with her sexuality, being outed, finding a group of people with similar experiences. It deals with a lot of things about queerness and like gender expression. I should note that the author Yuki Kamitana Tani is identifies as X gender, which is kind of the like equivalent to what we now have as the more modern term of non-binary. Though X gender, I believe, is like over like 30 years old since it was first coined. So that is yeah, that perspective definitely comes through in the series and tackles some similar issues to Blue Flag, which I think if you liked there, you might like even more. It goes more in detail on those experiences as well. So what's your recommendation for something similar to Blue Flag then?
Well, my recommendation is, and those who have some Guardian Enzo experience will have heard me talk about this series before, is Yugami Kun Niwa Tomodachi ga Inai by Sakura Jun. And the reason I choose that one is that it's like Blue Flag, it is a chronicle of the last year of high school. And at that point in your life where all those things that are happening in terms of finding who you are and and friendship versus romance and a lot of other interesting family related issues, and I just think it has, if you want authenticity and if you want emotional depth and if you want complexity, I think Yugami doesn't have any friends. That's a 10 out of 10. It's really subtle, it's really deep, and it does it in a very easy, very approachable, lots of humor, but not any kind of humor that diminishes the seriousness of the topics that it pursues. So even though the some of the themes it deals with are certainly different themes than Blue Flag, I do think it has a similarly powerful and deep reflection on that period in life that Blue Flag is primarily concerned with. So if one likes Blue Flag as a coming of age story, as a commentary on adolescence, I think Yugami-kun would be another series that you would totally appreciate that one too. And again, that may be one I recommend to you at some point in the future too. And frankly, I'm very tempted to do it even now, but it is longer than the series we've been doing for this series. So we're going to have to find the right time to do it. But I do think I think that's one you need to read.
That is duly noted. Yeah, I know that you really like that series as well, and that is another one where I've seen a lot of people whose opinions I also respect. Really, that series resonates with them. So yeah, I'd be curious about that definitely. Now the final portion is we're just going to give our ratings and just like final thoughts on the series. We've gone in length, and I feel like I've actually managed to touch on every key point that I wanted to. I've been meaning to have this conversation with someone, with anyone, for so long. So I feel like I can take a deep breath, and I've got my feelings out there. And yeah, I'm as someone who loves the ending, who really identifies with lots of the themes and experiences that it depicts, and the fact that it's a coming of age, high school romance drama, whatever you want to call it, series that just does things. It does things differently in an unexpected way, and has like a good cast of characters and one exceptional character in Mami. Yeah, there's so much I love about this series. I give it a 96 out of 100. It is one of my favorite manga that I've read, which is primarily set in a school, in high school specifically.
Okay. Well, I gave it 87, which for me is a pretty high score. I have some issues with, like I said, the third act is not as effective as the first two for me. But I what I appreciate is that it takes a look at some really challenging issues that not enough Japanese fiction approaches with the same respect and the same seriousness. I really appreciate that. And I do think it's not easy to cover this ground that this series is covering and find a really original and really different perspective on it. And I think it manages to do that. And I think it deserves a lot of credit for that. Uh, there are some things that didn't totally work for me, which is why the score isn't in the 90s. But I do think it's an excellent series. And for anyone who likes adolescent romance, who likes the coming of age story, who likes series that take a serious look at societal issues, I think this was something that you would really enjoy.
Yep, I echo that completely. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what any comments of anyone who has read it as well, if they have any different thoughts specifically on the ending, because I know that that generates a lot of discussion. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. But that's us today for this episode on Blue Flag by Kaito. Thank you, Enzo, for reading the series and having this very lengthy and detailed discussion. I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you. Thank you
And
very much. It was fun.
yeah, and see you next time. Bye bye.